Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, June 30th, 2022. History making at the Supreme Court. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first black woman justice ever, takes the oath of office. The oath's administered by the Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Stephen Breyer as Breyer retires on this final day of the term. And on this last day of the Supreme Court term, a couple of prominent rulings, one allowing President Biden to end a Trump immigration program known as Remain in Mexico that requires people seeking asylum at the U.S.-Mexico border to wait in Mexico while their claims are decided. The second case limiting how the Environmental Protection Agency can reduce carbon dioxide emissions from power plants to deal with climate change. President Joe Biden endorsing changing U.S. Senate filibuster rules in order to pass a national abortion rights bill with a simple majority, 51 votes, instead of a supermajority, 60 votes, in response to last week's Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade. President making those comments at a news conference at the NATO summit in Spain, where he also announced another $800 million in military aid to Ukraine and took questions about Russia's invasion of that country and the high price of gasoline in the United States. And former President Donald Trump in a new interview denying that he lunged at a Secret Service agent and grabbed the wheel of the presidential SUV when he was told on January 6, 2021 that he was not going to the U.S. Capitol with protesters who became rioters, calling testimony from a former White House aide this week before the House January 6th committee absolutely crazy. New York Times writing Ketanji Brown Jackson took the judicial oath just after noon on Thursday, becoming the first black woman to serve on the Supreme Court. Justice Jackson, 51 years old, was confirmed in April when the Senate voted 53-47 on her nomination. She will replace Justice Stephen Breyer, 83 years old, who is stepping down with the conclusion of the court's current term. Justice Jackson took both a constitutional oath administered by Chief Justice John Roberts and a judicial oath administered by Justice Breyer. The brief swearing-in ceremony took place in the West Conference Room at the Supreme Court before a small gathering of Judge Jackson's family. Her husband, Patrick G. Jackson, held the Bible. That from the New York Times. This is what it sounded like.
Welcome to the Supreme Court. We're here today to administer the oaths of office to Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to become an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. But before we do so, I would like to recognize Dr. Patrick Jackson, who is here, her husband, and her daughters Talia and Layla. The administration of the oath is required both by the Constitution and by the Judiciary Act, and so we'll be delivering two oaths. I'll deliver the constitutional oath, and Justice Breyer will administer the statutory oath. There will be a formal investiture in the fall, but the oaths will allow Judge Jackson to undertake her duties, and she's been anxious to get to them without any further delay. Are you prepared to take the oath?
I am.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Ketanji Brown Jackson, do solemnly swear.
I, Ketanji Brown Jackson, do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
That I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I'm about to enter.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you very much, and now I'll turn things over to Justice Breyer.
Good. The judicial oath, will you raise your right hand, please? Thank you. I, Ketanji Brown Jackson.
I, Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
That I will administer justice.
That I will administer justice.
Without respect to persons.
Without respect to persons.
And do equal right.
And do equal right.
To the poor and to the rich.
To the poor and to the rich.
and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge and perform all the duties incumbent upon me as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. Under the Constitution and laws of the United States. So help me God.
And now, on behalf of all of the members of the court, I am pleased to welcome Justice Jackson to the court and to our common calling.
At the Supreme Court today, the oaths to the newest justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson. Oaths given by the Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Stephen Breyer, who she is replacing. Stephen Breyer retiring today with the court's term end. A New York Times article on the ceremony includes this: her rise to the court will not change its ideological balance. The newly expanded conservative majority will retain its 6-3 majority. On this final day of the current Supreme Court term, a couple of high-profile rulings. First, this from Associated Press. The Supreme Court said Thursday the Biden administration can scrap a Trump-era immigration policy that was at the center of efforts to deter asylum seekers, forcing some to wait in Mexico. Two conservative justices joined their three liberal colleagues in siding with the White House. The justice's decision came in a case involving former President Donald Trump's Remain in Mexico policy, formerly known as Migrant Protection Protocols, which enrolled about 70,000 people after it was launched in 2019. Edilberto Roman is a law professor at Florida International College, today discussing this case on a panel looking at the Supreme Court term. It was hosted by American Constitution Society.
In Biden versus Texas, the Supreme Court addressed the Biden administration's attempt to rescind the migrant protection protocols, better known as the Remain in Mexico policy. The Supreme Court this morning ruled that the Biden administration, on basically what was viewed by most to be a controversial immigration policy, had the authority to reverse the Trump era policy that requires asylum seekers to remain in Mexico while their cases are reviewed in the courts. Now, this case, while consistent with respect to deference to the executive, causes me some pause, and I'll have to examine it closely, because this reversal of a rule set forth by a prior administration seems to run in the face of the Administrative Procedure Act that normally would require a notice and comment period, opportunity, as well as full administrative procedure rules associated with creating this new rule in terms of revoking the prior rule. Again, this is a matter that I'll be happy to address further in the future, and I know some media is here and happy to examine it. But other than looking at the issue of deference, this decision that was hailed by immigrant advocates as a windfall in terms of the opportunity to change a harsh policy in the past, is at the very least questionable with respect to the Administrative Procedure Act. The only way I would be able to reconcile it is to look at the prior decision, the protocols to Remain in Mexico, as not a rule, but as a policy. And then it would withstand some at least APA muster.
Law professor Edilberto Roman from Florida International College at today's American Constitution Society virtual discussion about the Supreme Court term. He was talking about today's decision in that case in the context of other immigration cases decided during this term. Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin of New York tweeting about this case: "There's a big difference here between can and should. Blindly ending the Remain in Mexico policy would be a disaster and would absolutely worsen the crisis at our southern border." But Democratic Senator Ben Ray Lujan of New Mexico tweeting, "SCOTUS allowed the administration to end the Remain in Mexico policy. It's the first step towards remedying years of humanitarian injustice. MPP has inflicted irreparable harm to nearly hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers and damaged our status as a leader on refugee protection." Another ruling today from the Supreme Court, again from Associated Press, and a blow to the fight against climate change. The Supreme Court on Thursday limited how the nation's main anti-air pollution law can be used to reduce carbon dioxide emissions from power plants. By a 6-3 vote with conservatives in the majority, the court said that the Clean Air Act does not give the Environmental Protection Agency broad authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from power plants that contribute to global warming. Kirti Datla is with Earth Justice, a strategic legal advocacy director with them, discussing this case, West Virginia v. EPA, again at the American Constitution Society panel.
So the decision the Supreme Court issued this morning ruled against the EPA. It said that the Clean Power Plan, which again never went into effect, has no effect now. It said that what the EPA tried to do in that regulation went too far. It triggered the major questions doctrine, and the court wasn't convinced by any of the reasons why the statute was in fact clear. And I think, as the dissent points out, what's so notable about this ruling is that, the majority opinion spends just a couple of pages talking about the text of the statute, and it really is not the same kind of discussion of statutory text that is in all of the other statutory interpretation opinions the court issued this term. It's not, what does the word system mean? It's, the word system is broad, and therefore it can't possibly be clear enough to authorize what the agency does, even if it might literally encompass, which the court kind of concedes, might literally encompass what the agency does, but because it's so expansive, it doesn't authorize it with the clarity that we would require. And that's just not the kind of textualism that the Supreme Court has proclaimed as the right way to approach statutes. And it's not the kind of textualism that's normally taught in law schools. And I think the dissent points out, too, that this is essentially a way for the court to look at a regulation, this court or any court, to look at a regulation that it doesn't like or thinks goes too far. That's essentially a policy judgment. And to say, we're going to make it very hard for the agency to win when its authority is challenged. In this particular case, if you take the words of the court, if you take the court at its word, all it did was say that the specific approach in the Clean Power Plan went too far, and a sort of ironic or odd result of the fact that it doesn't have any need to really engage with the text of the statute means that it doesn't otherwise limit what the EPA can do, because it doesn't have any reason to get into the weeds of what system means. So what the kind of bottom line climate impact of this decision is that the court has taken what is the most effective way to reduce emissions from the largest source of energy-related greenhouse gas emissions off the table. It has narrowed the scope of what the EPA can do, and it has given people that will bring the inevitable challenge to whatever the Biden administration does a pretty heavy tool to use when they bring that inevitable challenge. And we will see what the EPA does and how it grapples with this decision.
Kirti Datla, Earth Justice Strategic Legal Advocacy Director, at a panel discussion today about the Supreme Court term hosted by the American Constitution Society. This case, West Virginia v. EPA, and some reaction to the decision from the West Virginia Attorney General Patrick Morrisey on the Fox News Channel.
This is a huge victory for our American system of government. We've been arguing for many, many years, while everyone's been focusing on the question of climate change, we've said one simple thing, that if you have a major issue of the day, Congress needs to be the decider, not an unelected bureaucracy. That's what today's decision means. It ensures that these unelected bureaucrats are not going to be seizing power across the board. Today, it matters with respect to stopping the EPA's power grab. Tomorrow, it could impact what goes on at the Securities and Exchange Commission and other federal agencies. But this court got it absolutely correct, and it's a very simple position. Every state needs to have a role in the process. West Virginia, California, Texas, that's the way the founders envisioned it. And I think this is a very important victory for separation of powers, for the rule of law, and ensuring that overreaching government knows it has limits.
Patrick Morrissey is the West Virginia Attorney General on Fox News today. Congressman Paul Tonko of New York, Democrat, chair of a House subcommittee on the environment and climate change, had a hearing scheduled today about recycling, but in his opening statement mentioned this court case.
Earlier this morning, the Supreme Court limited EPA's authority to protect public health and the environment in the face of congressional intent for a rule that is no longer on the books and never went into effect. I'm completely dismayed by this decision, and I do know in the days ahead this subcommittee will study the decision and examine all options while urging EPA to take renewed action, however possible, to reduce greenhouse gas pollution.
Congressman Paul Tonko of New York starting a hearing today. Again, it was on a different subject, recycling, but he mentioned today's Supreme Court case. Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, tweeting the Supreme Court setting limits on what unelected bureaucracies can do on the energy front is welcome news. Major policy changes should be enacted through legislative bodies elected by people, not unelected bureaucrats. President Joe Biden putting out a statement that reads, the Supreme Court's ruling in West Virginia v. EPA is another devastating decision that aims to take our country backwards. While this decision risks damaging our nation's ability to keep our air clean and combat climate change, I will not relent in using my lawful authorities to protect public health and tackle the climate crisis. This is Washington Today. President Biden also today endorsing changing the Senate filibuster rule, which currently needs 60 votes out of 100 to pass legislation to put abortion rights into law. This following last week's Supreme Court decision that overturned the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision that legalized abortion nationwide, instead leaving the policy up to individual states. President Biden answering reporters' questions at the NATO summit in Madrid, Spain.
What further specific executive actions are you considering in response to the Roe ruling, and would you declare a public health emergency as several Democrats are calling on you to do?
I'll be happy to go in detail with you on that. I'm having a meeting with a group of governors when I get home on Friday, and I'll have announcements to make then. But the first and foremost thing we should do is make it clear how outrageous this decision was and how much it impacts not just on woman's right to choose, which is a critical piece, but on privacy generally. And so I'm going to be talking to the governors as to what actions they think I should be taking as well. And but the most important thing to be clear about is we have to change. I believe we have to codify Roe v. Wade in the law, and the way to do that is to make sure the Congress votes to do that. And if the filibuster gets in the way, it's like voting rights. It should be, we provide an exception for this, require an exception to the filibuster for this action to deal with the Supreme Court decision.
President Biden at a news conference at the NATO summit in Spain. This from CNN. The Senate doesn't have the 60 votes needed to codify Roe v. Wade under current rules. Key moderate Democratic senators Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona have expressed opposition to changing filibuster rules. And though Manchin is open to codifying Roe v. Wade legislatively, both senators oppose gutting the filibuster. Their offices reiterated on Thursday. Reforming the filibuster could also mean that if Republicans gain a majority in the Senate, they could pass a law in the opposite direction, banning abortion nationwide. But the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, told reporters back in May, when the draft opinion in the Supreme Court Dobbs abortion case was leaked, that he would never support that.
You've been adamant in the past about protecting the filibuster. I just wonder if the Supreme Court does indeed strike down Roe and you are majority leader, do you commit to keeping the filibuster in place at all costs?
Absolutely. Yeah, we don't want to break the Senate, and that's breaking the Senate. And we went through that exercise a couple of months ago. I said it was the most important day in the history of the Senate as an institution. That remains the case, and will, as far as I'm concerned, if we're in the majority, remain the case in perpetuity.
That's the Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell with reporters back in May. Again today, President Biden calling for the filibuster reform in the Senate to pass legislation to codify abortion rights, reducing the 60-vote current threshold. In the short term, though, Senate Democrats will be minus at least one vote. The Hill reporting that Senate President Pro Tem Pat Leahy, Democrat from Vermont, the most senior member of the Senate Democratic caucus, who stands third in line of presidential succession, fell and broke his hip and will undergo surgery on Thursday. Leahy is 82 years old, fell Wednesday evening at his home in McLean, Virginia, his office announced. Leahy's emergency surgery means he may have to miss time in the Senate, which would limit what Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, could schedule in the 50-50 Senate. That reporting from The Hill. And a statement from Senator Leahy's office includes these lines. Having been born blind in one eye, the senator has had a lifelong struggle with reduced depth perception. He has taken some remarkable dingers over the years, but this one finally caught up with him. He's expected to make a full recovery and begin a healthy course of physical therapy immediately. On this last day of Pride Month, a conversation with Jessica Stern, the State Department's special envoy to advance the human rights of LGBTI+ persons. She's at CSIS, Center for Strategic and International Studies, talking about what progress has been made in the first year plus of the Biden administration.
There are lots of examples of progress. There's some examples that I think of as, relatively modest, but if we want to change foreign policy, the way we do it is through lots of small initiatives coming together. So I'll give you one example just to show you how important it is to do this work. The Peace Corps thought, well, if we want to have a more diverse set of people in the Peace Corps, we need to ensure that our recruitment practices are diverse. So the Peace Corps convened a special Transgender Recruitment Day to ensure that transgender people know they are welcome in the Peace Corps, they are wanted in the Peace Corps, and that if there's a transgender person serving in the Peace Corps, they're not alone, right? There's a cohort of people. So that's an example of one tangible thing that makes inclusion happen. And then I'll give you an example of something at a policy level that I'm enormously proud of. At the Department of State, we released the first ever U.S. passport which has the X gender marker. We did so on April 11th of this year. Had you heard about this? Okay, some people shaking their heads. Well, now you know, and now you can tell your friends. But this really matters because the X gender marker means that we recognize more than the binary categories of male and female. So X stands for unidentified or other. And it's a really concrete way of saying that everyone should have access to legal identity before the law, and that our government is catching up with the lived realities of LGBTQI+ people.
At Jessica Stern, State Department Special Envoy to advance the human rights of LGBTQI+ persons, speaking at CSIS, Center for Strategic and International Studies. You can find the full event at our website, cspan.org. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Since the summer of 2020, roughly 214 public monuments have been taken down across the United States, either through official processes or by force. Sunday night on Q&A, Aaron Thompson, professor of art crime at the City University of New York and author of Smashing Statues, talks about the history of American monuments and current debates over which ones should be taken down.
After the death of George Floyd, millions of Americans marched to protest racial disparities, to say that Black Lives Matter, and often these rallies focused on monuments as a symbolic meeting point for showing who was honored in America, whose lives mattered, and whose lives did not.
Aaron Thompson with her book Smashing Statues, Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN's Q&A. You can listen to Q&A and all of our podcasts on our C-SPAN Now app.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. President Biden, writes the Washington Times, warned Americans that they could be paying high gas prices for a while longer, saying that energy costs will remain high until Russia is driven from Ukraine. Gas prices, says the article, are expected to remain near record highs as Americans head into the July 4th holiday weekend, typically one of the busiest travel times of the year. Americans are paying $4.86 per gallon for gasoline, down slightly from the $4.94 that they were paying a week ago, but still near the record highs reached earlier this year. President Biden making these comments at his news conference in Madrid, Spain, at the close of the NATO summit.
Jim Tankers, the New York Times.
Mr. President, thank you. This week, you and the G7 allies introduced a plan for an oil price cap for Russian exports, which is not yet filled out, and obviously is a response to the high price of gasoline in the United States and around the world. Are you confident that that cap would bring down prices for American drivers? And how long is it fair to expect American drivers to continue to pay a premium because of this war?
Let me hear this. The second part of the question was, would it bring down the price?
Will it bring down prices? And the war has pushed prices up. They could go as high as $200 a barrel, some analysts think. How long is it fair to expect American drivers and drivers around the world to pay that premium for this war?
As long as it takes. So Russia cannot, in fact, defeat Ukraine and move beyond Ukraine. This is a critical position for the world. Here we are. Why do we have NATO? I told Putin that, in fact, if he were to move, we would move to strengthen NATO. We would move to strengthen NATO across the board. Look, let me explain the price. I suggested a while ago that what we should consider doing is putting a cap on the amount of money that we would pay for, the world would pay for Russian oil, and that we would not provide, the West provides insurance, would not insure Russian ships carrying oil. We would not provide insurance for them, so they would have great difficulty getting customers. The point is that we've said to them, here's the deal. We're going to allow you to have a profit on what you make, but not the exorbitant prices that you're charging for the oil now. We've delegated a commission, a group of our national security people to sit down and work out that mechanism. We think it can be done. We think it can be done, and it would drive down the price of oil, and it would drive down the price of gasoline as well. In addition, at home, I have also called for changes. I've released 1 million barrels of oil per day from our oil reserve, and in addition to getting other nations to move forward, a total of 240 million barrels of oil to release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, number one. Number two, I've asked Congress, would they in fact go and temporarily end the tax on gasoline at the pump? And thirdly, to ask the states to do the same thing. If we do these things, it's estimated we could bring down tomorrow, if Congress agreed and the states agreed, we could bring down the price of oil about $1 a gallon at the pump, in that range. And so we could have immediate relief in terms of the reduction of the elimination of temporary elimination of the gas tax. And so I think there's a lot of things we can do and we will do, but the bottom line is, ultimately, the reason why gas prices are up is because of Russia. Russia. The reason why the food crisis exists is because of Russia. Russia not allowing grain to get out of Ukraine. And so that's the way in which I think we should move, and I think it would have a positive impact on the price at the pump as well.
President Biden at his news conference at the NATO meeting in Spain. He was also asked about a trip he'll be making in a couple of weeks to the Middle East, which includes a stop in Saudi Arabia, and whether he plans to ask the Saudi king or crown prince to increase oil production to reduce the price of gasoline. President Biden saying that he will not be asking Saudi Arabia individually, but encourage all Gulf states to increase their production. Yahoo Finance reporting that on Thursday, OPEC Plus, the international oil cartel effectively led by Saudi Arabia, held a meeting via video conference where the group decided not to further increase oil production from its previously announced plans, and that the group will meet again August 3rd. As President Biden was holding his news conference at the NATO summit in Spain, Republican Congressman Kevin Brady of Texas, ranking member on the Ways and Means Committee, was watching just before he was interviewed on the Fox News Channel.
He continues to blame Putin for the gas price hike. What's your response to that?
Yeah, this is nonsense. As you know, inflation in the U.S. was nearly 7% before this war began. Gas prices had already surged, unfortunately, before this war began. Has it exacerbated somewhat? Yes. But underlying it all is this attack by the president on oil and gas in America and his refusal, really, to work with the industry in America to try to lower these prices. And I can tell you that gas tax holiday that he's claiming will save $1 a gallon, our estimates are that an average family will save over 3 months $7, about a gallon of gas these days.
Yeah. So the president also again claimed that inflation is higher in other countries than it is here. But we've done some checking. Inflation is lower in France, Canada, Germany, Italy, Japan, France, and a couple of other major countries too. He's wrong again on this.
Yeah, no, he's dead wrong again on that. I think confused about it, frankly. Most reports show America's inflation is about 3 percentage points higher than most of the world, mainly because of his spending policies and his anti-energy policies. We are living in a very cruel economy. The new inflation numbers this morning is more bad news. We've got reports of Americans skipping meals, conserving water, eliminating meat, dipping into their life savings. And this number, Stuart, really bothers me. 26 million Americans have had their savings wiped out under Joe Biden because of this inflation. And 1 out of 4 Americans are delaying their retirement because of Joe Biden's very cruel economy. And that's why I think his poll numbers are just so staggeringly low.
Congressman Kevin Brady, Republican from Texas, ranking member on the Ways and Means Committee, which handles tax and trade issues, interviewed today by the Fox News Channel. By the way, the House and Senate not in session this week for legislative business. Gas taxes in several states are set to increase in the coming days, even as some elected leaders in those states are calling for gas tax holidays. And the increases are due to laws that require increases based on inflation. In Maryland, it's going up 7 cents a gallon. In Virginia, 3 cents. In California, 3 cents. In Vermont, the law there says that when less gas is sold, the tax needs to go up to compensate from the revenue. So on Friday, Vermont gas taxes will rise 3 cents a gallon. Wall Street today, the Dow down 253, NASDAQ down 149, S&P down 33. CNBC reports that Thursday marked the final day of the second quarter. The Dow and the S&P 500 posted their worst quarter since the first quarter of 2020, when COVID lockdown sent stocks tumbling. The tech-heavy NASDAQ composite down 22.4% for the second quarter, its worst stretch since 2008. And the S&P 500 posted its worst half of the year since 1970, hurt by worries about surging inflation and Federal Reserve rate hikes, as well as Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine and COVID-19 lockdowns in China. That from CNBC. This from Newsmax.com. Former President Donald Trump, in an exclusive interview with Newsmax, pushed back hard against claims made by former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson, who had worked for Trump's chief of staff Mark Meadows, calling her testimony to the House Select Committee investigating the January 6, 2021 incidents at the U.S. Capitol absolutely crazy. That's how Newsmax put it. In this portion of their interview, the former president talks about 2 claims from Cassidy Hutchinson: that the president dismissed concerns that supporters at his rally in front of the White House January 6th, those rally people who would later march to the U.S. Capitol building, some of them had weapons, and also the claim that when the president was told in the presidential SUV that he was not going to join the protesters at the U.S. Capitol, he grabbed the steering wheel and lunged at a Secret Service agent.
She said, I jumped from a car and I started strangling. Think of this. I started strangling a Secret Service agent who I know very well. I grabbed the steering wheel of a car that said that I wanted guns at my rally. I didn't want guns. I have to speak to, and I don't want guns for anybody.
Did you grab the steering wheel? Is there any truth
to that? Of course not.
Is that ridiculous?
In fact, the Secret Service came out and said that this story is totally false.
Yeah.
The woman is living in fantasy land. She's a social climber, if you call that social. I think it's just a shame that this is happening to our country. And we don't have any Republicans up there to dispute it. We have one who quit, Kinzinger, and we have another one who's down by 35 points
Liz Cheney.
in Wyoming. She's a total disaster. She's a train wreck. But think of it, nobody to cross-examine. Professor Dershowitz said you can't do where you have a hearing and there's no cross-examination. This would have been the easiest cross-examination anywhere. And they put her on, and they don't even confirm it with the Secret Service. The Secret Service people in the car said this didn't happen. But you don't even need that. Who would do that? I would grab a Secret Service person by the throat.
I don't even know if it's possible. Certainly not in the Beast.
It's very hard.
Even in one of the SUVs.
Well, it's very hard for another reason. These guys lift 350 pounds.
Right. I saw you get out of the SUV tonight. It seemed like it was pretty smooth.
Yeah,
it's
fine. I mean, but these are people. These are great people. These are great people. They've devoted their lives to it, and I think they were very embarrassed by it because it makes them sound terrible.
Tony Ornato and Bobby Engel.
They're great.
I
know them
their
very
records.
well.
Sterling.
They are
records.
sterling. And I was very nice that they came to my defense. I thought it was incredible, actually, because some whack job can say this stuff and get away with it, and other things that I wanted guns at my rally. Okay, now I'm speaking. Why would I want guns? I don't want people standing with guns in my rally.
Former President Donald Trump interviewed by Newsmax. CNN writes that Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney delivered a searing rebuke of former President Donald Trump and the GOP leaders at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library Wednesday night, recounting some of the damning details that the House Select Committee investigating the January 6, 2021 attack has uncovered thus far, and praising the bravery of witnesses, particularly the young female aides who have come forward to aid its investigation.
Over the last 18 months or so, since January 6th, I have been incredibly moved by the young people that I have met, young people who approach me everywhere, at home in Wyoming, in Washington, D.C., in airports all over the country. And I will tell you, it is especially the young women who seem instinctively to understand the peril of this moment for our democracy, and young women who know that it will be up to them to save it. And I have been incredibly moved by young women that I have met and that have come forward to testify in the January 6th committee. Some of these are young women who worked on the Trump campaign, some worked in the Trump White House, some who worked in offices on Capitol Hill, all who knew immediately that what happened that day must never happen again. America had the chance to meet one of these young women yesterday, Miss Cassidy Hutchinson. Her superiors, men many years older, a number of them are hiding behind executive privilege, anonymity, and intimidation. But her bravery and her patriotism yesterday were awesome to behold. Little girls all across this great nation are seeing what it really means to love this country and what it really means to be a patriot. And I want to speak to every young girl watching tonight. The power is yours, and so is the responsibility. In our great nation, one individual can make all the difference, and each individual must try. There are no bystanders in a constitutional republic. And let me also say this to the little girls and to the young women who are watching tonight. These days, for the most part, men are running the world, and it is really not going that well.
Congresswoman Liz Cheney, Republican from Wyoming, vice chair of the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, Wednesday night at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California. Herschel Woody Williams, the last surviving recipient of the Medal of Honor for Extraordinary Bravery in World War II, has died. He was 98 years old. New York Times writes that during the battle for the island of Iwo Jima, He wiped out 7 Japanese pillboxes with flamethrowers, opening a gap that enabled Marine tanks and personnel carriers to break through the enemy defenses. During his 4-hour foray, in which he received supporting fire from several fellow Marines, 2 of whom were killed during the mission, Corporal Williams returned 5 times to his headquarters to get new flamethrowers when his supply of diesel fuel and high-octane gasoline ran out. That was from the New York Times. 2 years ago, at a program marking the 75th anniversary of the Iwo Jima invasion at the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Triangle, Virginia, Woody Williams remembered the 2 Marines who died.
During that day, those 2 Marines that I selected, I did not know, sacrificed their lives protecting mine. Once I found out that that happened, I didn't know it at the time, but once I found out that that happened, this Medal of Honor took on a different significance. I said from that point on, it does not belong to me. It belongs to them. I wear it in their honor, not mine. I keep it shined for them because there is no greater sacrifice than someone who sacrifices their life for you, for me. PFC Charles Fisher and Corporal Warren Bornholtz were those 2 individuals. So they never got to come home.
Herschel Woody Williams in 2020 at the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Virginia. That from C-SPAN's American History TV at our video library at cspan.org. Williams, one of 27 Marines and Navy servicemen who received the Medal of Honor for heroism in the Battle of Iwo Jima during World War II, and one of 472 who received the medal in all of World War II. Woody Williams, the last surviving recipient of the medal from World War II, and he passed away on Wednesday at the age of 98. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. For more of Washington's top stories, emailed to you every day, subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word, at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.